This video is sponsored by the Puzzles and Props Kickstarter. I've always wanted to use more props in my D&D games, and when I say props, I mean things like the captain's hat that the players find in his cabin while sneaking in. Hey! Lady. It's just funner when you can see and feel the things you're using in the game rather than just having it listed on a piece of paper. But I've never gotten around to actually making my 3D printed props look like actual things instead of a colored object that just looks like a 3D print. The closest thing I've gotten was this owlbear claw that I painted up, and this was 2 years ago. So I decided it was time to try something different, out of my comfort zone, to try and turn these prints into painted pieces that look as close as possible to these photorealistic renders, having basically no experience making this type of prop before. And I wanted to bring you along for the ride. So let's have some fun. First of all, hi. I'm Danny, the 3D Printing DM, and welcome to 3D Printed Tabletop, a channel where we cover all things 3D printing for tabletop games. The pictures you see on the screen are the goal. This is what I want our models to look like. Now, these models are all from today's sponsor, the Puzzles and Props Kickstarter, which is live right now. And if you like this type of tabletop prop, it is definitely worth checking out, and I've got a link in the description below. Now, you'll notice there's not a lot of weathering on these models, even if this ocarina was found in the belly of a giant rat. It doesn't matter. We are trying to copy the art style of the render, not necessarily real life. And to do this, I'm going to be trying techniques I've seen online all over the years and hoping, praying they work like they do in those videos. Let's start with this elephant figurine. So I believe this figurine is supposed to be marble, but the marble I'm used to seeing in miniatures looks different from this render, so I decided to try something different that would hopefully be closer to the render. After giving it a coat of light gray satin primer, I mixed some brown and black oil paint, I thinned it down to make a wash, and I tried using it to make some of those streaks that you can see on the render. This is something a lot of my mini and terrain friends use all the time, so I felt like this was an opportunity to try it and see how it was. I'm gonna kind of push it around, play with it a little bit. Oh boy. Yeah, it didn't work. It ended up looking dirty instead of like the render. So I accepted it and gave it a coat of filler primer this time to try and start all over again. And one thing I do want to say, I was too lazy to sand this statue, and I know that's like a cardinal sin of prop making, but it's the honest truth, and it's also how I hobby. I can be lazy sometimes. So the extra coats of primer and filler primer ended up helping by covering up the layer lines and some of those holes that it had at the beginning. I did lose some detail, but the wash really helped to add some more depth, and sure, the result wasn't as accurate, but it also wasn't too bad by my standards. Now next up is the hand of the Arch Lich, which ended up being the most complicated of all of these props. Now to start, I decided to use a filament that I was sent for review because the color was pretty close to the darkest color in the render. After seeing the finished print, I decided I wasn't gonna prime it, and I was just gonna paint right on the naked print. I like sponging on colors when there's texture like I see in the render, so that's what I did for the skin and the interestingly shaped bone section in the palm area, which, you know, I still don't get, if I can be honest, but that's okay. We are sticking to the render. I also made sure to avoid dry brushing because since I didn't prime it, the layer lines would have been a lot more pronounced, and I don't want to highlight the layer lines since I don't want to sand it. And while I waited for this to dry, I moved on to the next piece, the copper ring. Now, the ring was so small, but the entire thing was one color, which meant it would hopefully be simple, but I wanted to get the same sheen as the render, so I knew I couldn't use my regular metallic paints because it wouldn't look right. So I decided to try something simple and tried this Krylon foil metallic spray over a coat of matte black primer.
Oh wow, that's
It's really, doesn't look like a copper, but. Ooh. I am liking this. Ooh.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, no.
Jesus.
Damn, dude.
And you're done.
Yeah, I am. Wow. What more is there to say? This was unbelievable to me after the first two props. Those of you who might not want to go out and buy all the paints and stuff that you see me using, this is for you. This was so easy. I couldn't believe that it just happened in seconds and came from a $6 or $7 can, and it was worth every penny. Would do it again in a heartbeat. The owl figurine. This little model, I printed it in transparent resin that I was also sent for review, just like the other filament. No money exchanged for that. But I knew translucent resin could get yellow and foggy or frosted, and this was my first time working with it, so I did what everyone else does and I followed a guide. The one I chose was by Props and Stuff here on YouTube. I thought, oh, well, as long as I get resin tinting pigments that are very similar, the brand doesn't matter, so it should work, right? Yeah, it wasn't the same. I don't know what it was, but it didn't react the same way. I don't know if it's because I hollowed the owl from the inside to save resin or if it was just a specific brand, but it didn't look as nice or as easy as the video. I think there was one part of the model that also didn't cure after leaving it in the sun and the curing chamber for a very long time. This was the only part of the model that never quite got the same shine and luster as the rest of it. But that gloss coat at the end really made a huge difference. That's the part you're gonna read all the time. You just gotta give it a gloss coat, and it's absolutely right. It's absolutely true. So after all was said and done, again, this Jade Owl wasn't exact, but I think it was pretty close. You know, if I gave the players this and said it was a Jade Owl, I think they'd totally buy it. All right, let's kill this hand. Get it? Kill it? All right. The wash was dry and I was ready to move on to the goth phase of this prop, those black fingernails. And I was all about it, man, but I needed to do the eyes first in case, you know, I colored out the lines a bit. Because it's much easier to paint black over white than it is to paint white on top of black. So the white part, the eyes, was easy. There was no shading outside of that wet gloss look and that kind of gray shadow that comes from the light source. But the hard part was the iris. You know, I originally wanted to use an airbrush because the colors, the blending, it was like this was made to be airbrushed, and I even made this little mask for it. It was just too much work. I was getting tired, so I just used some contrast paints that ended up looking kind of close. Now, I could move on to my favorite part, and after all was said and done, I was convinced that this was actually Ozzy Osbourne's hand, or that Ozzy Osbourne is actually an arch-lich who lost his hand. Both pretty plausible in my opinion at this point. I need a break at this point, and this video does too, so let me take a minute to tell you about today's sponsor, the Puzzles and Props Kickstarter. As you can probably tell by the title, this Kickstarter includes now over 150 STLs in that all-in pledge. Include classic D&D items and interactive puzzles ranging from easier print props like the ones you see throughout this video to more complicated builds like this super cool book puzzle. Each of these props also comes with easy to reference item cards that I really like. I think they look great. Many of the props you see in this video were originally stretch goals but have now been unlocked because the campaign is doing so well, including 3D customizers for the rings, daggers, pins, and amulets. So go ahead and check it out in the link in the description below. Thanks again to the Printing Goes Ever On team for sponsoring today's video and supporting hobby creators. Now, it's time to make an amulet. I decided to print this amulet in FDM, and I should have used ironing because of the flat surfaces, but I didn't. Hindsight's 2020. But I printed the inside gem part in resin because I wanted to see if I could get the gem look like I wanted with the owl, but I was afraid after the dipping of the owl figurine, I didn't want to try it. I probably should have done it anyways, because that purple pink contrast paint that I used on it was, it didn't turn out as well. The other thing I will say is I used that Krylon foil metallic again on this thing, only a silver this time, and it worked so well again, even on the FDM print. It just didn't fill in the layer lines, but it doesn't do well with porous surfaces, and it says so on the can, but the shine is there, and I was pretty impressed by it, all things said and done. So this is good stuff. And now I can live out my dream of running a not Zelda D&D campaign where the players find each piece in a forest dungeon, water dungeon, and fire dungeon, bring it to a princess who has a necklace passed down from generation to generation that ends up being the key to lock all of them together. The tripart amulet. Okay, it's time to make some wood. This little cutie here is an Ebony Fly. I printed it in resin to preserve as much of the wood grain as possible. I primed this with a light wood color, and I decided to try enamel paint for this. So if you look at this fly, something happened which I used an enamel coat. My first time using one. And I've got these bubbles that formed. It's not very common. They almost look like support stubs. They're these like holes in the print, in the model. And that sucked. I got these bubbles. It was so sticky compared to the acrylic primer I'm used to. I don't know. I don't think I'm gonna work with it again for a long time at least. And then I tried this wood finish marker just to see how it would come out. That didn't look good either, like at all. So the next thing was to try this wood grain technique that I learned from Daryl over at Off Earth 3D, where you use alcohol ink refills like Copic pens to kind of streak different colors of paint to make natural looking wood grain. And I totally believed in this because he's one of the best prop makers I know. And I'm serious about that. You should check him out on all the socials. I love his content, but I didn't have refills, so I kind of just like ripped them open and squeezed them out. As you can tell, I really wanted to make this happen. And the end result was this really rich, dark red color. Almost looked like a really saturated mahogany. I kind of like it. I did get some pooling and the bubbles were still there, but overall I thought the end result might not have been the same as a render, but still better than I'd expected after that initial coat of paint. Would I do this again? No, not with that enamel. No way. Continuing the theme of the Not Zelda campaign. This, if you remember, is the Ocarina of Shine. That's what I call it because of the silver and gold inlays. And yes, this is the very same one that was found inside the giant rat. This ocarina got the same treatment as the tripart amulet, but the biggest difference was I tried to use a more opaque contrast paint over the silver parts that looked like the dark bark texture. The contrast paint, it took a few coats. Coverage was kind of spotty, but overall I still think it was the right call. Now outside of the gems again looking okay, I think this is one that we did get pretty close. With one exception, the line. I promise I tried filling in the gap. I tried using putty, I tried smoothing it with my hand, and I still ended up with a line. So now it's called the Ocarina of Line. I needed to pick me up at this point. I was pretty tired. I needed the best boy, Sir Barcelot, the silent guard dog Onyx figurine. That isn't the official name for it, but I'm running with it. This little dude was just straight up glossy black coat and then some additional gloss coat at the end. That was it. And even without sanding, I think this is probably the best match we've had since the copper ring. So that's how to make an onyx looking thing. Black gloss primer and last little fine coat of gloss at the end. Now there was something else I really needed to try, and I decided it was gonna be with this Raven figurine. The render didn't look like a bright silver, chrome, or copper. It looked like a brushed nickel to me, and I couldn't find any brushed nickel spray like I did before. So I decided to try the infamous Rub and Buff. Uncle Jesse made a video on this like a million years ago in 3D printing time, and it stuck with me, but I've never used it. So I mixed together the gold and the silver until I got something like a brushed nickel finish, and voila. I think it turned out pretty nice, and not terribly difficult after all things are said and done. So, what did you think? Which of these props ended up bringing your favorite? And are there any techniques that you think I should try next? I would love to hear from you, so please leave a comment for us. And if you are interested in trying out any of these products I used today, I've included links to these in the description below. And while you're doing that, don't forget to check out the Puzzles and Props Kickstarter in the description below as well. If you like the content we make on this channel, the best way to support us is to pick up a late pledge on our website, lostadventures.co. Thanks again for watching. As always, happy printing and happy gaming, and I'll see you next time.